Welcome to another tutorial video. This week I thought it might be fun to look at sort of a fundamental concept in accounting, finance, and valuation, and to frame it around a current event, namely Michael Burry and some of his recent tweets about AI, big tech, and some companies possibly understating their depreciation. So in case you're not up to speed on these recent events, Michael Burry, who's famous from the movie The Big Short, recently made waves when he claimed that many of the big tech companies like Oracle and Meta have overstated their earnings by understating their depreciation on GPUs and data centers. So we want to address whether he is correct. Here's the tweet in case you haven't seen it. He's essentially making the point that many of these companies went from saying that the useful lives on their network and compute assets were 3 to 5 years back in 2020. And now most of them are saying that the useful lives are more like 5 to 6 years. So it's a pretty significant expansion. And he claims that these companies are overstating their earnings by 20% to 30%, something in that range as a result of this. Now, this video is not about whether we're in an AI bubble, because I think everyone knows the answer is yes. It's also not about whether AI will eliminate all jobs and kill all humans, because I think we all know the answer to that is maybe. But instead, I just want to focus on this one specific claim about current AI spending and how companies are depreciating their CapEx here. So for all the files and resources, you'll want to go to this URL, go to our knowledge base page, accounting, and then CapEx-depreciation. I'll pin this below the video as the first comment so you can click it there. There are a couple Excel examples there that illustrate different concepts that I'm going to walk through in this video. So to give you a very short answer to this question, I'm going to go back to my favorite meme diagram here for the low IQ, high IQ, and middle IQ crowds. Now, the people in the high IQ end and the low IQ end are both ironically correct, because the lower end, they don't really understand what depreciation even is, and then the higher end people point out that it doesn't really make a huge difference in most proper valuations. And then you have the people in the middle, like a lot of the online debaters on this point, arguing about useful lives and how much of an earnings distortion there is, and so on and so forth. But really what it comes down to is that if you set up your valuation properly, the depreciation shouldn't really make that big of a difference, and that it's more important for what it tells you about the rest of the model. The metric of earnings, or net income, is almost irrelevant to a proper valuation of technology companies. Now, in some industries, like commercial banks and insurance, it can be very important, but for tech companies, you tend not to focus on this metric or the related PE multiple in most cases. You normally want to use metrics that normalize for capital structure and accounting differences, such as EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or even something like EBITDA minus CapEx, for example. If you're setting up a DCF that's based on long-term unlevered free cash flow forecasts, the depreciation factors in, but mostly because of the modest tax effects it provides, and specifically how higher depreciation can create greater tax savings for the company. Now, this whole point about useful lives and whether it's 3 years or 5 years or 6 years for the GPUs, that can affect things. But the ironic part is that depreciating assets like GPUs and data centers more quickly, meaning that depreciation as a percent of revenue is higher, could actually boost valuations. And the reason this happens is because shorter useful lives mean that the tax savings from depreciation are more valuable today. I'm going to go in Excel quickly and show you what this looks like. I've created a very simple DCF here that lets you sensitize the depreciation and CapEx. And what you'll see is that as depreciation goes from 10% of revenue to 15% of revenue, meaning that the company is depreciating assets more quickly, its valuation actually goes up from about 149 billion to about 162 billion. And this all comes back to the tax line in the DCF. When the depreciation is higher, such as 15%, the taxes go down, and over time that adds up to a significant savings. And so the company ends up being worth more, ironically, when it is depreciating its assets more quickly. Of course, there is another wrinkle to this, which is that a shorter useful life can also imply higher CapEx, because if the assets don't last as long, the company will have to spend more to keep replacing those assets over time. And so you do have to consider both sides of this here. So for example, if we say that depreciation goes from 12% to 13%, by itself, yes, the company looks slightly more valuable. But if it also means that CapEx now goes from 15% to 16%, actually, in this case, the company becomes slightly less valuable. It goes from 154 billion to about 146 billion because of the fact that the assets don't last as long, and now they have to spend more on CapEx to keep replacing and upgrading those assets over time. So in this lesson, I'm going to start by walking you through CapEx and depreciation accounting, just so you're clear on the basics. Then we'll talk a little bit more about CapEx and depreciation in valuation and DCF analysis. And then I'll wrap up by explaining why no one is really right about this AI CapEx debate and how they're not really asking the right questions. And I'll suggest some different ways to think about this at the end. Let's start with the basic accounting. So with CapEx, the idea is that the company is spending money on long-term assets that are going to last for many years, such as factories or equipments or data centers and GPUs in this case. If a company spends $100 on CapEx on January 1st of the year, there will be no initial impact on the income statement. There will be a $100 cash outflow on the cash flow statement, and on the balance sheet, cash will be down and net PP&E will be up. So let's go to Excel and take a look at what this looks like. I'll go to the accounting tab over here, and I will go over, and for capital expenditures increases by, I'm going to enter 100 right here. Now when I do that, and we go down and look at the income statement, there are no changes. On the cash flow statement, within cash flow from investing, CapEx here is now negative 100, reflecting this cash outflow. And then on the balance sheet, the cash is down by 100. It was 400 before, now it's 300. Net PP&E was 1,200, now it's 1,300. So that's the first step of the process. Now in the next step, we have to record something for depreciation, which is normally based on the amount that we spent minus the salvage value. In other words, what the asset might be worth at the end of its useful life if we can resell it to someone or otherwise extract money from it. We subtract and then we divide by the useful life. Now in this case, just to keep things simple, I'm going to say that the salvage value is 0. So it's 100 minus 0 over 10 years, we're saying for the useful life here, just to keep the math simple. And this comes out to $10 per year. So when this happens, you go through a whole set of steps and changes on the income statement, cash flow statement, and balance sheet. But let's just go into Excel and see what this looks like. I think it's easier to understand visually. So if we say that the depreciation increases by 10, we have a 25% tax rate. What this means is that we record this depreciation on the income statement. So our pre-tax income here is down by 10. It was 400, now it's 390. Our net income is down by 7.5 at that 25% tax rate because when we record the 10 of depreciation, we also get tax savings of 2.5. So our net income here is down by 7.5 rather than being down by 10. Now, on the cash flow statement, our net income is down by 7.5. We add back the depreciation because it's non-cash, so we add back 10. We still have that 100 of CapEx because we're looking at what happens over the course of this entire year. And so at the very bottom, our ending cash here is down by 97.5. I'll expand the decimal points so you can see this. It's down by 97.5 because yes, we spent something on CapEx, but we also got about 2.5 in tax savings from this change. Now on the balance sheet, our cash is down by 97.5. Our net PP&E went up by 100, but now it's down by 10. So overall it's up by 90. And so our total assets here is down by 7.5. Now on the other side, our common shareholders' equity is down by 7.5 because the net income fell by 7.5. So both sides are down by 7.5 and our balance sheet remains in balance. And that's how it works accounting-wise. The key point here is that the earnings, the net income, is affected only by the depreciation, the allocation of the CapEx after the fact, not by the initial CapEx. And this is why Michael Burry is stating that many of these companies have overstated their earnings because they're recording something like 10 for depreciation when he's claiming that in reality, it should be more like 20. And so you can see what happens. The net income goes down as a direct result of recording a higher depreciation number right there. Now, in a valuation context, if you use multiples like enterprise value to EBITDA that are not affected by depreciation, this shouldn't really make a difference. If you use a multiple like price to earnings, that's problematic because that multiple is affected by depreciation, capital structure, interest rates, and other factors that we normally prefer to ignore in a valuation. So if you go to the multiples tab here, I have a couple other examples. In this very simple example, one company's depreciation is 4% of revenue. The other company's is also 4% of revenue. And right now, they have exactly the same PE multiples and the same EBITDA multiples. But if I make this first company's D&A 8% of revenue, you can see what happens. The EBITDA multiples here stay the same, but the PE multiples change. And now this first company appears to be trading at much higher PE multiples, and the second company is now trading at much lower PE multiples. And this is part of what Michael Burry is referring to, that if you have these big depreciation differences, then it can create the illusion that these companies have very different earnings. And it's true that their net income is different, but if you look at what really matters, in other words, the EBITDA, the earnings before any of this factors in, you can see that actually they're about the same. And what you really want to do in this case is, if you had a situation like this, you'd probably want to look at the EBITDA minus the CapEx rather than just the EBITDA, so you can assess just how big of a difference this makes. Are these companies really spending a much different amount on their CapEx, or is the depreciation difference just a matter of internal policies around how they recognize that spending over time? And on this point about the DCF, as I showed you at the start of this video, the depreciation is added back to calculate unlevered free cash flow, and it also reduces the company's taxes in the process. So on the surface level, if you just look at first order effects here, yes, if you make D&A as a percent of revenue 15% rather than 12%, the taxes right now are about 4.1 to 4.3 billion per year, but at 15%, now they're only 3.6 to 3.9 billion per year. But the problem is that you can't really just make an assumption like that in a model, because you also have to acknowledge that with that assumption, the company's CapEx as a percent of revenue is probably going to go up as well, because they're going to have to buy these assets and upgrade these assets more frequently and spend more on that over time. So for example, if we now increase the CapEx to 18% of revenue, the unlevered free cash flows here are about 8.5 to 10 billion per year. Now, for reference, if we change it back to 12% and 15%, the unlevered cash flows were actually higher in that scenario. So the company would be worth more at 12% and 15% for the D&A and CapEx numbers here than they would be at 15% and 18%. And that's the type of thing that you have to factor in when you talk about valuation and the impact of these policies and the company's spending. Now, I want to conclude by talking about why no one is actually right in this particular argument. Honestly, I have no idea what the proper useful life of an Nvidia GPU is, and I think this debate sort of misses the main issue, which is how much in additional long-term revenue and cash flow is generated by this huge amount of AI CapEx spending. If you looked at something like a retail or restaurant company, this would be pretty easy to establish, because we know how much it costs to open a new location, and we can estimate the amount of revenue and profits generated each year by that new location. I'm going to pull up an example here of a simple restaurant company where they keep increasing their restaurant count. We know about how much in sales each restaurant generates, and we can use those two to figure out the sales estimates. So if we know, for example, that the company is spending, let's say, $700,000 to open each new location, and we knew that each new location generates around $2 million in sales and has a certain profit margin, we can figure out how long it takes to earn back our investment, and we can figure out what the long-term cash flow profile looks like. But for these big tech companies, we don't really have answers to those questions because the data is not disclosed in a useful way. Companies aren't really directly stating how much in revenue directly comes from their AI initiatives, and we don't really know what's responsible for the growth. A lot of them have very impressive looking growth rates, but we don't know if they would have also been impressive without all this AI CapEx spending. And so that's why I don't really think we can answer this eternal question about whether all this CapEx is actually worth it, at least not as of right now. So that's about it. Let's do a quick recap and summary. CapEx and depreciation accounting. The main important point here is that when the initial CapEx is incurred, this just shows up on the cash flow statement and changes PP&E and cash on the balance sheet. When you actually start depreciating it, allocating it over time, then you record it on the income statement. It reduces net income. It's a non-cash charge that provides some tax savings for the company. And so the cash gets a slight benefit from that tax savings. The net PP&E overall is up, but it decreases as a result of the depreciation. And the way the balance sheet balances is that the common shareholders' equity is lower because of the reduced net income. Now, in terms of valuation multiples and the DCF analysis, in general, you get around this issue by focusing on EBITDA multiples, or even something like EBITDA minus CapEx as a metric and multiples based on that. And that can get you around these arguments over the proper useful life for assets. Depreciation and CapEx are important in the DCF mostly because of the modest tax impact from depreciation. And finally, in this debate, no one really knows what the proper useful life is, but I don't really think it matters that much. The key question really is not what the depreciation should be, it's what amount of revenue and cash flows are coming from this CapEx, how long does it take to realize, how long does it take to get some repayment of this initial CapEx, and what are the requirements here? How often do they have to keep spending at this level to keep getting some type of return on their investments? And until we have answers to those questions, or at least some type of rough estimate, I don't really think that anyone is particularly right in this debate. So that's about it. Hopefully now you know a little bit more about CapEx and depreciation and how it affects accounting, valuation, multiples, and the DCF analysis.